All right, today we're laying out a real-deal roadmap for mastering data engineering. And look, this isn't just another tutorial. This is a plan to build true competence, right from the ground up. So, let's dive in.
Sound familiar? I mean, have you ever been stuck in tutorial hell? You've watched hours of videos, followed along with a ton of guides, but then you face a blank screen, a real problem, and you just freeze. It's super frustrating, right? Well, that's exactly what we're here to fix.
So this is the core of it all, right? The difference between just knowing syntax and actually building competence. It's one thing to know what a command does, but it's a completely different ballgame to know why you should use it and how it's working under the hood. We're talking about moving from just following a recipe to becoming a real chef, solving complex problems with a big picture, systems-level view.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll talk about escaping tutorial hell and what this engineering-first philosophy is all about. Then, we'll walk through the three big phases: building foundations, hitting those advanced transformations, and finally, production and governance. And at the end, we'll talk about how you can get started on this journey yourself.
Our whole approach is built on what we're calling the engineering-first philosophy. What does that mean? It means we don't just learn commands. We're thinking about optimization, we're thinking about cost, we're thinking about architecture from day one. Every single concept gets looked at through a serious engineering lens.
And how do we do this? We do it by mastering the trifecta, these three pillars of modern data engineering. You've got SQL, that's your logic. Then there's PySpark, that's the powerful engine doing the heavy lifting. And finally, AWS, the whole engineering infrastructure that it all runs on. The real magic, the real mastery, happens right where these three overlap.
All right, let's see how this all comes together. Starting with phase one, building foundations. This is all about the bronze layer. In other words, that supercritical first step of getting raw data into our system and doing it safely and efficiently.
The main goal here is simple but crucial. Ingest raw data, be ready for when the schema suddenly changes, because it will, and lock down your security right from the start. As you can see, we're covering the whole spectrum, from DDL constraints in SQL to Spark configurations all the way to IAM roles in AWS.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting, because this slide shows how we connect all the dots. Let's take a common task, right? Merging new data, an upsert. In SQL, that's your merge into statement, easy enough. But an engineer asks, okay, but how do I make this thing fast? In PySpark, that means you need to understand stuff like repartitioning to control how data gets shuffled around. And then in AWS, you got to understand your Redshift architecture, the difference between the leader and compute nodes. See? Logic, engine, and engineering, all for one single task. That's the mindset.
And of course, phase one covers a bunch of other essentials. We're talking about solid data cleaning, enforcing schemas so your pipelines don't break, running basic aggregates for audits, and partitioning your data the right way to avoid that dreaded small files problem. All right, moving on up to phase two, advanced transformations. This is the silver layer. This is where we take all that raw data and start turning it into something truly valuable, something ready for analysis.
So, the goal here gets way more complex. We're now implementing some pretty sophisticated business logic, we're handling data history with what are called slowly changing dimensions, or SCDs, and we're getting really serious about optimizing performance. The difficulty is definitely cranked up a notch here.
And this just perfectly illustrates that next level of thinking. Let's look at handling data history, a classic data engineering headache. The SQL logic, that's your SCD type 2 with start and end dates. But what happens if your data is all skewed and your joins are slow? Well, the PySpark answer is a technique called salting. And then from the AWS engineering side, you have a huge decision to make. Do you use a transient EMR cluster that you spin up and tear down, or a persistent one that's always on? That choice has massive cost and performance implications. This phase is also where we go deep on advanced SQL with window functions for things like deduplication. We learn the difference between join strategies in Spark, like when to use a broadcast hash join versus a sort merge join. We make smart caching decisions, and we orchestrate all these complex workflows using AWS step functions. And that brings us to the final stage, phase 3, production and governance. This is the gold layer. Here, our focus completely shifts to delivering high-quality, reliable, and secure data to our end users. Yeah, the goal here is all about that last mile. We've got to ensure reliable delivery, have solid monitoring in place, super tight security, and, this is a big one, really effective cost control. Honestly, this is the stuff that separates a junior dev from a senior engineer. So let's see how this works for a production deployment. Your SQL logic? You might wrap that up nicely in a stored procedure. When you submit your PySpark job, you're using specific production flags to make sure it's stable. And the engineering piece of the puzzle? Automating the whole thing with a CI/CD pipeline in AWS so your code gets deployed automatically and reliably every single time. And we round it all out with skills that really define a top-tier engineer. Using materialized views to speed up dashboards, actually unit testing your data pipelines, implementing things like row-level security, and actively managing your costs with S3 lifecycle rules and spot instances. This is the pro-level stuff.
So there you have it. That's the roadmap. A really comprehensive path from the basics all the way to production-grade engineering. But now comes the most important part, turning this plan into action.
Look, this isn't just something to watch on a screen, it's a journey to be a part of. And the invitation from the source material is pretty direct. It says, I want you to be with me in this journey.
And getting involved is super simple. This is a daily series. The idea is for you to follow along, study these concepts, and then share your own notes down in the comments. Let's make it a community thing, because we all learn faster when we learn together.
The whole point here is to make that critical shift, to finally move away from that passive cycle of tutorial hell and step into the active problem-solving world of real engineering competence.
The path is laid out, it's structured, it's deep, and it's focused on what actually matters. So the only real question left is, are you ready to build?